No Stella, no life, IV. Stranger. Teacher, you ever had a lover or something? Stranger. There you go with yet another sudden question. Constructed within a dream was the witch's domain, and while sitting with his legs crossed on the grassy plain of that unwithering illusion, Aldebaran tilted his head, causing the witch to frown her well-shaped eyebrows. Fundamentally, the witch would welcome any question with open arms, so that reaction was rather fresh and unusual. Today, as always, Aldebaran had been made to experience a hellish time, tormented by the trials bestowed upon him by the witch. Subconsciously, he let out an "oh" as his eyes sparkled. Aldebaran, what's this now? Did I hit a sore spot for you, teacher? Witch, it is in poor taste to become so proactive when it comes to that. I am the witch of greed, a being who avariciously covets all kinds of knowledge, so I have answered all of your questions until now as sincerely as possible. If I have allowed you to misunderstand that attitude of mine, it would be my own insufficiencies that I would need to painfully reflect on. Aldebaran, starting to talk fast just makes it even more suspicious. This witch is way too easy to read. Witch, you are quite a bit lacking in relent. I think it would do you better to show some more consideration. As Aldebaran seized the moment and jumped on the topic, the witch raised her voice in such a manner. Given that he was normally in the position where many things were done to him, he had desired to savor this situation in which he held such an advantage for as long as he could. But first, he wished to prioritize delving deeper into this topic. That was to say, Aldebaran, love talk, which, what a lowbrow curiosity, I have no recollection of raising you in such a manner. Aldebaran, even if you don't remember, students are cultivated by watching the backs of their predecessors. Frankly, if we're gonna talk about who I got this lowbrow curiosity from, then you've got no chance of winning, teacher. Which, I see, this is a defeat in education. Regardless of learning on one's own, it is quite the great task to make another person learn. Good grief, there is much to learn. Aldebaran, oi, it's no use trying to get out of this by playing such a sentimental grown-up move like that. Even if you say something that seems profound, my current spirits won't be crushed. Which, fine. As Aldebaran, with lowbrow curiosity in his heart, proactively refused to let her off the hook, the witch cast a wry smile. Which, regardless, it is difficult to say if it will meet your expectations. As you can see, given that I possess an extraordinarily excellent appearance from an objective perspective, there was no shortage of people who attempted to court me. But then again, none of those individuals ever became a close companion of mine. Aldebaran, as expected, even if a flower is beautiful, it's no good if it has a deadly poison. Which, from the fact that you strongly assume poison as a factor to begin with, I can tell just how much you understand me, which makes me glad. Well, that perception is mostly correct. In the first place, witches place a heavy burden on others by merely existing in the same vicinity. There exists no means to avoid this. Additionally, which, unlike the other girls who became witches along the way, I was a witch by birth. To put it another way, I do not know any way of life that does not place a burden on others. As one who is so thirsty for knowledge, I think it to be quite the irony. Placing a hand over her chest, the witch reminisced, and witnessing that, Aldebaran's throat closed up. He had brought it up thoughtlessly as payback for everything that she was always doing to him, but he had ended up closing in on an unthinkable darkness of the witch. Aldebaran, is that so? Sorry, that was a bit thoughtless. To think that by birth, you were a natural-born loner who had no way to associate with others. Wait a second. Then, as he attempted to reflect on it aloud, he suddenly realized. Aldebaran, nah, if you really couldn't associate with anyone, it contradicts me even being here in the first place. It also contradicts the reminiscences you occasionally tell me about, teacher. Which, Aldebaran, you just clicked your tongue. This was a premeditated crime, you ill-natured witch. Half closing her eyes, the witch averted her gaze, and Aldebaran cast aside his reflection from a moment ago. Her approach of trying to throw up a smokescreen on any inconvenient topics like this was truly a tactic befitting a witch, but now that her technique had been seen through, she would no longer be able to escape. Aldebaran, in fact, there've also been times when you've uttered the names of men, teacher. That's a front that these lowbrow ears of mine won't let slide. Which, holding a grudge are we, only, sorry to say since you've taken such an interest, but my answer is that nothing really happened. In particular, that which you speak of, the notion that anything happened between myself and the members of the opposite sex that I have brought up in conversation. Such a thought. Aldebaran, such a thought. Which, just by imagining it, I feel a sensation of my soul rejecting envisioning anything further along those lines. I have never attempted such a thing, but it is surprising how vivid of a sensation it is. To think that I could be made to experience such dread. Aldebaran, setting aside their humanity, was it something like them being horrible as members of the opposite sex? Which, no, they were not a lot praised for their humanity either. It is a miracle that the group did not fall apart along the way, or rather, they did a few times, but the girls managed to mend things back together. Perhaps it hurt her head to think back, because as the witch searched through the shelves of her memories, and the people present in those recollections came to mind, she was pressing her hand on her forehead the entire time. If even this ill-natured witch was speaking of them so harshly, Aldebaran assumed they must have been quite the formidable lot. But at the same time, he also noticed something. He noticed that, as the witch spoke, her lips were by no means pursed in displeasure. Which, speaking of the opposite sex, the majority of my companions at the time belonged to it. Though, as I have said, it would have been quite problematic to have such a perception of them. Reed was out of the question, Farcel was married, and Alec and he both had people they were in love with. Volcanica was not a target for such a thing, and Reed was out of the question. Aldebaran. There was someone marked as out of the question twice, but I see, if any such developments happened, it would have turned into a quagmire for the party. Which, it was sort of like a mud boat founded on balance rather than trust, so the journey could have very well ended up as a mud boat sailing through a quagmire. Given that there was no leeway for such things, are you satisfied? Aldebaran. Well, when you put it like that, no, I won't give up so easily. Even if you didn't choose anyone close at hand, you ought to have had a summer romantic adventure or something with someone you met during your journey. Which, why are you so fixated on this that you would make such leaps like that? I would have been glad if you displayed this much initiative during the trials I had prepared for you. Seeing Aldebaran's enthusiasm when it came to this topic, the witch pouted her lips in a bit of a dejected manner. But unfortunately, there was no way for her wish to be granted. To begin with, the impetus for this conversation topic had been a retreat to reality from the harsh and merciless trial she had given him. For just a bit longer, until Aldebaran's heart regained some leeway, this topic would not be dropped. Regardless, the conversation had already delved into a rather interesting zone. Aldebaran. See, there was something you had boasted about earlier, teacher. Something like that it became the point of many scuffles to seek out your knowledge as the witch of greed, teacher. At the time I thought you were just joking, but just for now, I'll believe it in order to broaden the current conversation. Which, I would prefer if you did not use such a disappointing method of broadening the conversation. I'll speak if you make me, so I would like it if you could make it enjoyable for me to do so. Aldebaran. Yo, sexy lady, beautiful courtesan witch, with a smile that can make all royalty and nobility weak in the knees. Which, how smooth, well, I have experienced an episode quite similar to that. It was an obvious encouragement, but it seemed like it had cheered the witch up, and she began speaking of the past. If there was a similar episode, would it be stuff like courtesans and weak-kneed royalty? Whichever happened to be more applicable, it was sure to be an episode that packed quite a punch. Which, at the time, Magraza was still at the height of its prosperity. We were basically a group of fugitive problem children, so we were trying to hide our identities as much as we could. But Farcel ended up getting found out by a noble of that nation. Though that was also because when someone came to return something that he had dropped, he boldly declared in the middle of the road, "My venerable self shan't forget this gratitude. Should you encounter any hardship, do visit the kingdom. I, Farcel Lugunica, shall grant you my aid." Aldebaran. Was that companion an idiot? Which, indeed, he was a fool. Foolishly earnest and honest to a fault, well, he was the type who was applicable with everything that could be attributed to being a fool. And so, our identities were revealed because of Farcel, and we ended up being invited to a banquet of nobles. That is where they saw me for the first time. Aldebaran, heh, so you caught the eye of some nobleman. Placing his hand on his chin, Aldebaran pretended to be impressed, though he was not particularly surprised. To the point that even Aldebaran, who was already well accustomed to her face, would end up slipping a what a beauty. If he let his mind lose focus, the witch harbored a truly beautiful appearance. Earlier, he had likened her to a beautiful flower, but it truly was the case. As if her allure and toxicity were proportional, she was a poisonous beauty. Witch? No, the one whose eye I had caught was not merely some nobleman, it was the crown prince of Magraza. But it seemed like Aldebaran had still underestimated the toxicity of that deadly bane. Which, at that time, we had just split up from the ones with capable fighting strength, which was quite the hard blow. In fear of causing any larger ruckus, we had intended on following the other party's demands for the time being, but before I knew it, preparations for the wedding ceremony were already commencing. I almost became a queen. Aldebaran, you could say that was dangerous in two different ways. What happened then? Which, naturally, the wedding of the crown prince would have been a large-scale event involving the entire nation. Of course, as most people might expect, that wedding was completely and utterly spoiled. Ultimately, it was the result of Reed and Volcanica going on a rampage, but the trigger for that was Aldebaran, teacher. Her loquacity in speaking of those resuscitated memories suddenly paused, and in response to Aldebaran's suspicion, the witch gave a curt, "It's nothing," before eliminating the hesitation in her words. Which, anyway, that was how my wedding with the crown prince was cancelled. We were chased out of Magraza, but not too long afterwards, the black serpent began wreaking havoc in that nation. It thus met its demise, and we had not the time to concern ourselves with it. And that was that. Aldebaran, you can't just end on that was that. That was a great tragedy. Teacher, I can't believe that you and the rest were even involved with the black serpent. Which, still, I think Daphne bears more of a responsibility than I do when it comes to the witch beast's damages. Well, I won't deny the possibility that the black serpent had been pursuing us. The witch shamelessly shrugged her shoulders, and Aldebaran was at his wit's end because of her attitude. If Magraza was unable to gain the protection of the witch and her allies against the damages of the black serpent due to having incurred their displeasure with an unwanted wedding, could that have been called a blunder of their royal family? Which, it was nothing so simple. Before he knew it, a white table and tea set had manifested there, and the witch responded to Aldebaran's internal thoughts as she pleased, bringing a cup to her lips. He wanted to delve into those details a bit more, but Aldebaran knew from experience that her current demeanor, holding her long-lashed eyes closed, meant that she would refuse going any further on this topic. Even though it was a topic she had chosen, he found the witch's whims to be quite troublesome. Aldebaran, but with how it stands, there are way too many ups and downs, so it surely can't be called a romantic story. Which, is that so? Well, when it comes to entanglements with the opposite sex, it's always the same old story. As I had said, I was unsure of whether it was a predicament that would live up to your expectations. As a matter of fact, the witch was an individual possessing outstanding talents, and an appearance so beautiful that the prince of a nation fell for her at first sight. Assisted by her own thirst for knowledge, she could likely make anybody fall in love with her if she so desired it. Which, a waste, is it? The reason why I am unable to grasp an accurate measure in the realm of love is likely due to the poor examples I had in my vicinity. The witch, who can always read ahead in the happenings of Aldebaran's mind, gave a rather sad self-analysis after reading his feelings. Nearby examples regarding love, what matched that description was which. I have hinted at it many times now, but my parents were good-for-nothings. I learned many negative emotions, such as contempt and ridicule, from my parents. Though from their perspective, my very existence would have been a failed imitation, a result that they had not desired. Aldebaran, teacher, which, but it is quite ironic how I, who despise my parents in such a manner, am now doing the same thing that they did. I suppose this could be called self-deprecation or self-reproach. Haha, even though a long time has passed since we parted ways, I still find myself learning new things from those two. Holding the cup, the witch's fingers trembled, and she cast her face down towards the table. Her bangs hung before her eyes, and no longer able to see her expression, unease burgeoned within Aldebaran. Beyond that unseen expression was the witch angry. Was she saddened? She was probably not smiling, but whichever thing it might have been, it was not something he could ascertain. Even so, Aldebaran did not do anything so tactless as to peer at it. Instead, Aldebaran gently hugged the witch's slender body from behind. Witch, even though you do not fully grasp the situation. At Aldebaran's deed, the witch expressed her bewilderment while being embraced. Hearing the witch's perplexed voice, Aldebaran began to regret what he had done, but that was overcome by the lone fact that she had not shaken him off, allowing him to continue hugging her. Aldebaran. How should I say this, teacher? Anyone who says that you're doing the same thing as your parents is way off the mark, so it'd be better if you don't dwell on it too much. That's what I think, therefore I am, or something. Which, that is a complexity unique to disorganized opinions. But there are many holes in that logic. You claim I am off the mark, but my parents produce the existence known as myself for a purpose, and I produce the existence known as yourself for a purpose. In that case, you could say that I, who perpetuated the chain, am more malicious. Aldebaran, that's if you believe that me and you are the same, teacher, and that the perpetrators of such an act are good for nothing. You have a nasty personality, you don't understand people's hearts, and if you add it all up, you've killed me around 1,000,000 times, teacher. Which, simply put, I'm a heinous villain, Aldebaran. But I don't hate you, teacher. With just that, these two cases are completely separate matters. The witch had spoken of her parents as good-for-nothings, revealed that she despised them, and though she had not said it explicitly, she would have likely harbored resentment and grudges towards them. But if she was reproaching herself for doing the same thing as them, then why did those same sentiments not exist within Aldebaran? That was evidence that the witch's actions were completely different to those of her parents. Which, though, I also think it is entirely possible that you are simply a much better person than I am. Aldebaran, stop trying to tear down the premise we've established so far. Just accept your salvation. Which, very well. As the witch scrambled to nitpick, she gently caressed the hands of Aldebaran, who was embracing her from behind, and without shaking him off, she silently closed her eyes. The witch could run wild through his inner thoughts as much as she pleased, and yet he was completely unable to get a read on her feelings whatsoever, so it was quite an unbalanced relationship. Even so, Aldebaran, I like you, teacher, I really do. In this world, there might not be a single man who would fall in love with you for any reason other than your looks, but there is at least one right here, so rest assured. Which, though I think there is no way that no members of the opposite sex has ever taken an interest in me for reasons outside of my appearance, but I suppose this is where I say thank you, Aldebaran. Who's to say? But normally, when someone confesses that they like you, you would respond with how you feel. Although he played it off as a joke, those words had taken quite a bit of courage from Aldebaran. In response, the witch placed a finger over her lips with a hum. Right now, he could not see the witch's face as she leaned the back of her head against his chest, and the time spent in contemplation felt extremely long. And then, witch, I am a woman who does not know love, hence I will not say that I love you. Aldebaran, NGH, well, yeah. Which, it is just. Receiving the words at the end of the witch's contemplation, Aldebaran attempted to quickly accept the result. But speaking over Aldebaran's evasive response, the witch continued. Which, if the sentiments I feel towards you can be classified as love, I think that would be nice. Aldebaran, with an unseen expression and a relaxed voice, just what sort of feelings the witch had spoken those words with, was not something Aldebaran could tell in the slightest. His days spent with the witch were filled with such things. The witch, faithful to her curiosity of wanting to know and understand, would not allow him to step into the deepest parts of what he wished to know and understand. Even so, Aldebaran, I'm well aware that it's no use even if I badger you with love talk, teacher. Which, good grief, what a thing to say to me after I have answered all of your whims. I wonder who it is you take after. I would love to see your parents' faces. Aldebaran, even though you know it damn well. While cursing at her in such a manner, Aldebaran suddenly realized something that troubled him. His arms were still embracing the witch from behind, and he did not know at what time he ought to let go. When it came to being unable to speak of any romantic stories involving lovers, it seemed like they were in the same boat. To be continued.